is not rewarding Hamas. Madam Deputy Speaker, since entering office, we've taken concerted action in Gaza. We restored funding to UNRWA. We supported the independence of the international courts. We suspended arms export licenses. We provided food and medical care to hundreds and thousands of Gazans. We've worked with Arab partners on a plan to ensure a reconstructed Gaza no longer run by Hamas. And since Israel restarted strikes on Gaza, this government has demanded Israel change course. Privately, in my conversations with Foreign Minister Saar and Strategic Affairs Minister Dermer, publicly in repeated joint statements with my French and German counterparts, we've made clear that Israel's actions are intolerable. We have raised our concerns in the UN Security Council and before the International Court of Justice. Yesterday, my honourable friend, the Prime Minister, joined leaders from France and Canada strongly opposing the expansion of Israel's military operations. And the UK led a further statement with 27 partners criticising Israel's proposed new aid delivery mechanism and defending the essential humanitarian principles of the international system that the UK did so much to establish in the first place. Our message is clear. There is a UN plan ready to deliver aid at scale, needed with mitigations against aid diversion. There are brave humanitarians ready to do their jobs. There are over 9,000 trucks at the border. Prime Minister Netanyahu, end this blockade now and let the aid in. Regrettably, Madam Deputy Speaker, despite our efforts, this Israeli government's egregious actions and rhetoric have continued. They are isolating Israel from its friends and partners around the world, undermining the interests of the Israeli people, and damaging the image of the State of Israel in the eyes of the world. I find this deeply painful as a lifelong friend of Israel and a believer in the values that were expressed in its Declaration of Independence. As the Prime Minister and fellow leaders said yesterday, we cannot stand by in the face of this new deterioration. It is incompatible with the principles that underpin our bilateral relationship. Rejected by members across this House, and frankly, it's an affront to the values of the British people. Therefore, today, I'm announcing that we have suspended negotiations with this Israeli government on a new free trade agreement. We will be reviewing cooperation with them under the 2030 bilateral roadmap. The Netanyahu's government's actions have made this necessary. Madam Deputy Speaker, today, my honourable friend, the Minister for the Middle East, is summoning the Israeli ambassadors to the Foreign Office to convey this message. I say now to the people of Israel, I want a strong friendship with you based on shared values, with flourishing ties between our people and societies. We are unwavering in our commitment to your security and to your future, to countering the very real threat from Iran, the scourge of terrorism and the evils of anti-Semitism. But the conduct of the war in Gaza is damaging our relationship with your government. And as the Prime Minister has said, if Israel pursues this military offensive, as it has threatened, failing to ensure the unhindered provision of aid, we will take further action in response. The UK, Mr. Speaker, will not give up on a two-state solution. Israelis living in secure borders, recognised and at peace with their neighbours, free from the threat of terrorism. Palestinians living in their own state, in dignity and security, free of occupation. The two-state solution remains the ideal framework, indeed the only framework for a just and lasting peace. But as the House knows, its very viability is in peril, endangered not only by the war in Gaza, but by the spread of illegal Israeli settlements and outposts across the occupied West Bank, with the explicit support of this Israeli government. There are now weekly meetings to improve new settlement construction. Settlement approval has accelerated, while settler violence has soared. Here too we have acted, repeatedly pressing for change in this course and direction, sanctioning 7 entities in October and signing a landmark agreement to bolster support for the Palestinian Authority when Prime Minister Mustafa visited London just last month. But here too we must do more. Today we are therefore imposing sanctions on a further 3 individuals and 4 entities involved in the settler movement. I have seen for myself the consequences of settler violence, the fear of its victim, the impunity of its perpetrators. Today we are demonstrating again that we will continue to act against those who are carrying out heinous abuses of human rights. Madam Deputy Speaker, despite the glimmer of hope from January's ceasefire, the suffering from this conflict has worsened. But January showed another path was possible. We urge Netanyahu's government to choose this path. The world is judging. History will judge them. Blocking aid, expanding the war, dismissing the concerns of your friends and partners. This is indefensible, and it must stop. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Priti Patel.
Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is appalling, and we continue to see the intolerable suffering of life being lost. A sustainable end to this terrible conflict is urgently and desperately needed, and that means the release of the remaining 58 hostages from the cruel Hamas captivity that we've all witnessed for too long. It means a significant increase in aid getting into Gaza. And it means a new future for Gaza, free from the terror and misery caused by Hamas, who bear responsibility for the suffering we've seen unfolding since the 7th of October 2023. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll take each of these 3 issues in turn. Firstly, on the hostages, can the Foreign Secretary explain what recent engagements he's had on trying to secure their release and return to their loved ones? Is Britain contributing to an overall strategy to free the hostages? Are we in the room for these critical discussions? Because we know the hard work that went into all of this at the beginning of the year. Secondly, on aid. I've been asking the government for clarity over the way it is using its influence to get aid in for weeks. On the 6th and the 14th of May, we questioned the Minister for the Middle East on steps being taken to unblock aid delivery. We've asked the government for details on the engagement it was having with Israel, what the response was to Israel's plans for an alternative aid delivery model, what practical solutions the UK has worked on with Israel to address their concerns about aid diversion, and no substantive answers were given. So what has the government been doing in recent weeks to facilitate the delivery of aid and find practical solutions with other countries to get aid in? Have the government just been criticising Israel, or have they been offering to work constructively to find solutions on aid delivery and securing a ceasefire? We see from the joint statement issued yesterday that the government and other international partners may not be supporting or participating in the aid delivery model proposed by Israel. So can the Foreign Secretary explain why that conclusion has been reached? If I can return to my statement, how does the non-participation help to get aid into Gaza and to stop the suffering that is being experienced by everyone? And while members shake their heads, we should be all focused on securing that. Members opposite should be ashamed of themselves, because the focus of this House should be on getting aid into Gaza. Because the UK, actually no, because the UK, and I can speak as someone that has supported aid getting into Gaza and other humanitarian crises, and the member opposite might want to even intervene rather than calling me out and saying that my comments are shameful, because the UK has consistently been a leader when it comes to world aid delivery. So we should be at the forefront of finding practical solutions, supporting the delivery of aid of those in need. So has the Foreign Secretary, with the approach that he has just outlined towards Israel, done all he can to secure an increase in aid? And has the UK's influence actually fallen now when it comes to this entire aid discussion and also the dialogue we've had with Israel? Third, on the future of Gaza, the government has agreed with our position that there can be no future for Hamas. That's completely non-negotiable. So what practical steps are being taken to end their role in Gaza and dismantle the terrorist infrastructure? What coordinated international steps are being taken to stem the flow of money, weapons and support bankrolled by Iran? We're still awaiting an Iran strategy coming from the government. Can the Foreign Secretary expand upon this? We had the statement last month from the Foreign Secretary on the MOU with the Palestinian Authority. Can he give an update on what steps are being taken to improve the governance of the PA? Because the MOU posed many questions, and I don't need to go over those questions. I've raised them previously. The UK obviously needs to be involved in this process, given our historic role in, for example, the Abraham Accords. This may be our best shot when it comes to regional peace, and the Foreign Secretary must convince us that we have influence when it comes to the ceasefire and negotiating a better future in this part of the world. And can I ask the Foreign Secretary what discussions have taken place with one country that does have influence, and that is the United States administration, when it comes to peace efforts and also getting aid into Gaza? Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to conclude by saying a few things. Strong words will do little to resolve the real challenges that are taking place and the suffering that we are seeing day in, day out. And it should be a cause, that's a matter for your government to address, it should be the cause of concern that we've reached a situation now where statements and actions, if I may say so, that have been echoed by the government today, and by that I'm referring to the Prime Minister's joint statement with France and Canada. That statement and actions of this government have now been supported by Hamas, a terrorist organisation that I prescribed as Home Secretary. They've actually put out a statement. I'm sure the Foreign Secretary has seen that. Now, the Foreign Secretary's decision to tear up trade negotiations with Israel and if I may finish, and actually stop the bilateral roadmap will not only, it's not shocking, these are important questions. These are important questions. So can I just ask them, if the Foreign Secretary if the Foreign Secretary can't answer these questions, that's fine. So then please do answer these questions, because they're important. Well, I would if members didn't keep interrupting, because it's quite obvious that the government doesn't want to respond to these important questions. I think it is important now, because there is so much human suffering. I understand the points that the Foreign Secretary has made with regards to the steps that he's taken with Israel. But how is this going to help now when it comes to wider security issues, threats from Iran, and how do we know that this will not be self-defeating in any way forward?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, for decades there has been a cross-party commitment to a two-state solution in the pursuit of peace. Friends of both Israel and Palestinian people across this House. It was the Thatcher government that imposed an arms embargo after Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982. It was David Cameron who first called Gaza a prison camp, and it was Theresa May's government that championed the UN Resolution 2334 on settlements. It was William Hague who worked with John Kerry on the push for peace and condemned the idea of moving the British embassy to Jerusalem. Sadly today, it seems that the Conservative Party, or at least the current front bench, is refusing to confront the appalling reality of what is happening in Gaza and what the Netanyahu government is doing. The Honourable Lady seems incapable of offering any serious criticism about the egregious actions by the Netanyahu government, unlike many honourable members on her own side. I think the whole House should be able to utterly condemn the Israeli government's denial of food to hungry children. It is wrong. It's appalling. Will she condemn it? Well, the whole House has seen. Opposing the expansion of a war that has killed thousands of children is not rewarding Hamas. Opposing the displacement of hundreds of thousands of civilians is not rewarding Hamas. On this side of the House, we are crystal clear. What is happening is morally wrong, unjustifiable, and it needs to stop. And that's why we've taken the actions we have. She knows that hostage families are deeply concerned with what is happening. They're deeply concerned with their loved ones. She knows that. She knows that we oppose the blockade on aid. Does she? It wasn't clear from her statement whether she does oppose the blockade of aid to children. And she should note our diplomats led that call, 27 countries joining us, to condemn what is happening and stand on the side of truth and history. What a shame she couldn't bring herself to do so today.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Yasmin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement in the Chamber today. Just last week, the UN Humanitarian Chief, Tom Fletcher, warned that the Security Council must act decisively to prevent genocide, and that today, he said, 14,000 babies could be dead in the next 48 hours. The level of destruction we have seen of the Palestinian people and their land is remarkable. Now, Israel has shown it will not respond to diplomatic appeals. What we need now is continuation of full arms embargo, sanctions, accountability of war crimes, immediate recognition of the State of Palestine, and the return of UNRWA. And can I ask the Foreign Secretary what additional steps he's going to be taking in order to starve off this genocide?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, I draw her attention to the announcement that I've made today on further sanctions, building on the announcement I made back in October. It's very important that we send a clear message to Israel that they should allow a full resumption of aid into Gaza immediately, that they should enable the UN and the humanitarian organisations to work independently and impartially to save lives, reduce suffering and maintain dignity. And she will have noted the coordinated statement of 27 countries, including Canada, Denmark, Finland, France, many others, that came together to make their views crystal clear about what we now see happening and what we expect to see happening and the further action that will have to take place if we don't.
Lib Dem spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. And I know that he, like me, has been horrified by the scenes coming out of Gaza. Tom Fletcher, the UN's humanitarian chief, has indeed highlighted and predicted the imminent death of thousands of infants without immediate aid, and said that the amount of aid entering the Strip is but a drop in the ocean. Let us be clear. Mass starvation will do nothing to remove Hamas or secure the release of the hostages. So I welcome yesterday's joint statement with Canada and France. In it, the Prime Minister spoke of taking further action if Israel does not fully lift its aid blockade and draw back from expansion of military activity. So can the Foreign Secretary confirm whether the expanded sanctions list includes extremist ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who have advocated illegal actions to dispossess Palestinians across the occupied territories, and if not, why not? And will the government go beyond reviewing the 2030 bilateral roadmap and urgently suspend it unless the government of Israel changes path? Will the government now finally block the export of all UK arms to Israel? In response to my letter to the Foreign Secretary last week, the Minister of State reaffirmed the government's position that it considers that Israel only risks breaching international law through its blockade. So I asked the Secretary of State, What more would Israel have to do to the people of Gaza for its actions to constitute not simply a risk, but an actual breach of international law? The Minister in his reply also stated that the government would only proceed with recognition of a state of Palestine at, and I quote, a time that is most conducive to the peace process. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me and the Liberal Democrats that the time to recognise Palestine is now, and that immediate recognition, ideally jointly with France at next month's summit, would send the strongest possible signal about the UK's commitment to the Palestinian people's right to self-determination?
Secretary.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. Can I say to him that I have condemned the statements of Ben Gvir and Smodrick in the past. On the 6th of May this year, Israel Finance Minister Smodrick said Gaza will be entirely destroyed. Civilians will be sent to the south to a humanitarian zone without Hamas or terrorism, and from there they will start to leave in great numbers to third countries. We condemn that language. We condemn the language of Minister Ben Gvir, and of course we keep that language under review and will continue to discuss these issues with our international partner. He asks about recognition and the work that we see France and Saudi Arabia doing, and of course we are in close dialogue with our P5 partner in France and with Saudi Arabia. In fact, I touched on these issues with the Saudi Arabian PM in Rome at the weekend. He asks about the roadmap. As I've said, we will review the roadmap. He will recognise that there are elements of that roadmap, particularly as they pertain to security issues, the work we do jointly on Iran, that would not be right to suspend, but we are reviewing it, as we should, given the circumstances. And I have said time and time again that we have suspended arms sales that could be used in Gaza, notwithstanding those that we must necessarily retain, that particularly pertain to the supply chain on F-35s and their use in warfare in other theatres with which we have an interest.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for his strong statement today. It feels like it's taken a long time for us to get to this point. Secretary of State, when something's intolerable, we stop it from happening somewhere or another. Will this actually stop what is happening in Gaza, or is it too late? The fact that Netanyahu has said he will let a small amount of aid in means that he understands that he's been withholding aid. That is a breach of international law, and we must call it out for what it is. And we must insist that the hostages are returned, and also the prisoners who are held without charge.
Secretary.
Well, the Honourable Lady rightly prays and aid international humanitarian law, and she knows that because we in this country were one of the great architects of that international humanitarian law, we have to stand by it. And when we see it breached, we have to call it out. I begun that process less than 3 months into office, back in September, when I suspended arms sales to Israel. I'm terribly sad that we've had to act in this way to suspend any discussion of a new trade deal with Israel, to review our roadmap with Israel. And it is deeply worrying that 3 leaders came together to have to put out the statement they did, to make it crystal clear that the actions that are taking place must now come to an end, or there will be further acts to bring this war to an end. We will do all we can.
Mark Pritchard.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement today? I think this is the strongest statement that I've heard in this House in recent times on this issue. And can I welcome the actions and the sanctions that have been announced today, and I hope the Government will continue to keep those under review and take further measures if necessary. Is it not now increasingly clear that the Israeli Prime Minister has misled the US President over allowing aid back into Gaza? 10 trucks is a perverse and pathetic token. And does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that the Israeli Prime Minister is in real danger of taking both the American people's support for granted and the support of the US President for granted?
Well, I noted reports today of deep frustration in the US administration in relation to what they are seeing. And certainly President Trump has said that this war is just going on too long. And I think he said that again last week on his own visits to the Middle East. I note the Honourable Gentleman's tweets, and he's been raising these issues. Is he as concerned as I am about the position of this front bench?
Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement today, and I agree with him in that January did provide that very small window and glimmer of hope. Hope for the innocent civilians who continue to be bombed for many months. Hope for the innocent hostages who just want to be reunited with their families. Hope that was withered away by the Netanyahu government who broke that ceasefire. And the Foreign Secretary is right in that the world is watching. The world is also watching us as a UK Parliament. The UK is legally bound to prevent acts of genocide. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that we must have clear and tangible consequences for Israel if they continue to use blatant disregard for international law and using food and aid as a weapon of punishment?
Secretary.
Well, it is because of those very same issues and my concern that the denial of essential humanitarian assistance to a civilian population is unacceptable and risks breaching international humanitarian law that I suspended arms back in September. I want us to get back to a ceasefire. I want us to get back to diplomacy. There can't be a role for Hamas, but there can never be a role for using food as a tool of war.
Kit Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the anger and the outrage of the Foreign Secretary is appreciated by us all, and I sense that it is genuine. But he knows as well as I do that the Israelis couldn't give a damn what he says in this chamber, or indeed for the statement. And as he will know, since that statement is issued, dozens of Palestinians have been killed, and there have been voices of defiance from the Israeli government. Now, the statement mentions the taking of concrete action. I'm not quite sure what the trigger for that is, and many of those in this chamber have been trying to spur the government into taking action over the last few months. We've tried anger and outrage and got nowhere. We've tried shaming ministers into action and got nowhere. So maybe we need to beg. Does the front bench need us to beg for the lives of those Palestinian children before they'll trigger this concrete action, whatever it might be? I'm begging the Foreign Secretary to pluck up all his moral authority and courage, stand up in government against the blockage in Downing Street, and please try to save these children's lives as soon as possible.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I listened carefully to what the Honourable Gentleman says, and I just want to take issue with the way he began his question. I think it's wrong. It's wrong to characterise the whole of Israel in the way he did. It's not the Israelis couldn't give a fig what's said from this front bench. That is not the case. Our issue today, and why I've taken the decisions I've taken about a new free trade agreement, about a review of the roadmap, and why I've announced further sanctions, is because of the position of this Netanyahu government and the language that we see from these ministers. And it was why I was so shocked that his own front bench couldn't stand up and find their own moral authority. I am proud of what we have done since coming to government, right from the beginning. I want to see an end to this war. He knows that, and our diplomats are doing all they can to try and use our lever to bring this war to an end.
Abdeslam Mohammed.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Foreign Secretary's very strong statement today and thank him for his work on this matter. The Foreign Secretary confirms the words of Minister Smotrich that Israel's goal is to destroy everything that's left in the Gaza Strip. Smotrich has also said that Israel will carry out the conquering and cleansing of the Gaza Strip. Prime Minister Netanyahu has praised these words, saying that Smotrich was speaking the truth. This is effectively an explicit admission that Israeli officials intend to carry out ethnic cleansing. Foreign Secretary, what are we doing to satisfy our obligations of the Geneva Convention to prevent a genocide from taking place, and why are we not sanctioning Minister Smotrich?
Foreign Secretary.
Our obligations were met under our legislation to ensure that none of us are complicit in any acts that breach international humanitarian law when I suspended arms back in September. And she will remember many of us were in opposition, were surprised and shocked that the last government had failed to do that. So our obligations were met. But they weren't satisfied. They weren't satisfied because the war still goes on. And that is why, working with international partners, I have announced further measures today. It's why we continue to discuss these issues with the Israeli government. And it's why my honourable friend has summoned the Israeli ambassador to make our position crystal clear.
Right honourable members will see that there are in the region of 70 members wishing to contribute. This is a very important statement, and equally there is important business to follow. You may all help each other by asking short questions. Stephen Flynn.
Right. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. No pressure. To see the Foreign Secretary finally find some fire in his belly on this issue was certainly most appreciated, but long overdue. But ultimately, as has been mentioned earlier, the government is still a block to action. So would he support this House being given a vote on whether we support the work of the ICJ and the ICC or not? This House being given a vote on whether we will recognise the State of Palestine, and this House being given a vote on ending all arms sales to Israel.
Secretary.
What can I say to the honourable gentleman? I've had fire in my belly since the day I was born in the Whittington Hospital in North London. Be sure of that. This House led the call for the international criminal architecture that we have, and we will continue, and successive governments have, to support that international architecture.
Paul Wall.
Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement today. The children of Gaza are being not just starved to death, they're being bombed to death, as Israel tries to wipe Palestine itself off the map. So I welcome his statement, particularly his robust action on the illegal settlements in the West Bank, but also on suspending any free trade agreement talks with Israel. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me, though, that history will judge all governments around the world and every member in this House, not just on what we said, but on what we did in the face of this 21st century atrocity?
Well, I recognise why the honourable gentleman puts his remarks the way he does. What we must do is act in concert. You know, this is deeply, deeply frustrating, of course, but he will know, because I know he knows history, that the ability for the UK to act unilaterally or to act with one other partner was determined in the Suez crisis, where it was crystal clear that we did not have that influence unilaterally any longer in the Middle East. That's why it's so important that 27 partners came together, and why it's so important that I continue to discuss these issues with Secretary of State Rubio and Vice President Vance, and I did discuss these issues with Vice President Vance this Sunday.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, I doubt whether there's a single member of this House that does not wish to see the 58 remaining hostages returned to their families, whether dead or alive.
And the 10,000 Palestinians.
I think that the Foreign Secretary was right to say that genocide, my words, not his, that genocide and war crimes are not the way to get the hostages released. There are in this House parents and grandparents who will stand up for children anywhere in the world. I'm prepared to nail my colours to that mast. We have to take action. We cannot stand by and do nothing. A number of us, I think all Privy Councillors, Madam Deputy Speaker, wrote to the Prime Minister relatively recently, calling for the two-state solution to be imposed immediately. Sadly, that private letter did not receive a response, which is why it was published. Foreign Secretary, please take that message back to the Prime Minister and act.
Yeah. Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman for what he said. In a cross-party spirit, he brings great authority and experience to these matters, and he knows that as a P5 nation, we are talking to our French counterparts about the way forward as we head to their conference next month, and we're also talking to Saudi Arabia, who are jointly hosting that conference with him, and I recognise why he raises these issues, particularly in relation to the children, in the manner in which he does.
Alex Ballinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement today and these essential actions, the sanctions on extremist settlers and the suspension of our trade negotiations with Israel. It is important that Israel sees that its allies will not stand by while they continue to forcibly displace Palestinians and blockade. So can the Foreign Secretary tell us what further discussions he's had with the EU on suspending their EU-Israel Association Agreement so we can put further pressure on Israel to stop the brutalisation of Palestinians in Gaza?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I can confirm that I was invited to the EU's foreign ministers' informal meeting just under 2 weeks ago, in which these issues were discussed, and I was able to discuss these issues with EU High Representative Kaja Kallas just yesterday.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Speaker, in correspondence to the Business and Trade Select Committee earlier this year, the Government placed some of the reasoning for not stopping licences for F-35 related components on the need to maintain arms for Ukraine. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary what practical steps have been taken in the 3 months since that letter was sent to ensure that weapons manufacture and supply to Ukraine is separated from the supply chains to Israel and the occupied territories?
Well, I stand by the decisions that we've taken to meet our obligations for security around the world and the decisions we've made in relation to the F-35s. And can I make absolutely clear to her, our decision to suspend arms sales that could be used in Gaza is a serious one, and we are absolutely content that we are meeting all obligations that I set out back in September.
Presenter Alan Khan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, Israel admits that it only allowed 5 aid trucks into Gaza for over 2 million people. That is more than Northern Ireland's entire population. This weaponisation of food is morally reprehensible. We must impose an arms embargo and sanctions on the Israeli officials that are responsible for these heinous crimes. Benjamin Netanyahu, Smotrich and Ben Gvir. I welcome the joint government statement with Canada and France. So given the fact that time is running out with every moment that we are standing here talking about this issue, can the Secretary of State clarify the conditions and the time frame for the very firmest of action?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that we've made the decisions that we've made today. She will recognise that there is an important conference convened by France and Saudi Arabia where we will be working jointly with those partners. And can I ask her to look carefully at the leader's statement and our absolute commitment to take further action if necessary to try and bring the course of action that the Netanyahu government has set its desire on in terms of military expansion and the blockade of aid, that we will take further action if needed in the coming days and weeks.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This government has consistently maintained that the determination of genocide, ethnic cleansing and war crimes is a matter for a competent court. And yet the lawyers instructed by this government to defend against a case brought by Al-Haq recently have been unequivocal in that it is this government's firm position that no genocide is occurring, that we have no legal obligations to the international Court of Justice ruling, and that it is a matter for Parliament, not the courts. So I ask the Foreign Secretary to clarify, are these lawyers speaking on behalf of this government? And if this truly is the government's position, will he finally explain why he sees military support for Israel as compatible with our obligations under international law, rather than saying it's simply a matter for the courts?
Yeah. Foreign Secretary.
I've got to say that's a crude caricature of a very serious issue. I took a decision back in September in relation to international humanitarian law and suspending arms sales that could be used in Gaza because these are very, very serious issues. I understand the issues that are before the ICC and the ICJ. They are very, very serious issues. And it is because votes in this Parliament helped to set up those mechanisms and made us part of those mechanisms that I leave it to them to make the necessary determinations that they must properly make.
Dame Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have seen the slaughter of innocents going on for far too long. And as others have said, people are dying right now. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement, and I welcome the Prime Minister's statement yesterday with France and Canada. But the Foreign Secretary mentioned that he had met with Vice President Vance and to really get a breakthrough on this, because Israel is not listening. America needs to be part of that. Is he able to tell us about that conversation with President Vance and whether he has any hope that we can make a statement jointly with the US as well?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady, and I know that her constituents will be deeply concerned with what is happening. Let me say to her that we had hoped, and I know that Vice President Vance had hoped, that we would get a breakthrough in the ceasefire that was being broken by the United States, Qatar and Egypt. But she will have also seen that the United States has also been able to strike direct deals, and it got its hostage out last week by going direct to Hamas, and that the breakthrough that we had hoped for towards the end of last week has not come through. And at the moment, I have to say, I don't foresee a ceasefire deal just at this stage. And that is why the only way forward is through more diplomacy, not less. It is not through military means. And we have to be crystal clear that we disagree with the course that the Netanyahu government is now taking.
Sir Desmond Swain.
The House wants to know, and Israel needs to know, exactly what he means by further action.
Foreign Secretary.
I would ask him to consult the Oxford Dictionary and look at the two words.
Naz Shah.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first thank the Secretary of State for coming to his House and his statement and for the actions that he's taken. I also welcome the Prime Minister's statement with regard to yesterday's statement jointly. One of the things that we talk about genocide, the word is used quite often here, and all indicators are pointing towards that. So what else can be done to stop? I appreciate the suspension of the free trade agreement, those negotiations. I appreciate all of that, but children are still dying every single day. You know, people are losing their homes. It's, you know, what will it take? What do we have to really wait for to call it what it is, and to actually act like to stop what is happening?
Secretary.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, and she talks with such integrity, and I know that she's been a consistent ambassador, really, for the Palestinian people in this House. And I know that she's really clear, and she feels the same as most of our constituents. They want this to stop now. And the actions we have taken bilaterally is a diplomatic move by the United Kingdom government to exert influence to try and make it stop. But I say to her that she knows history. She knows that we cannot do that unilaterally. I wish I could stand at this dispatch box and say that we could. Maybe if I was standing here in 1950, that might have been possible, but here we are in 2025. We must work in concert with other partners. That is why that statement from 27 countries, the statement the Foreign Minister put out, is so important. It's why we've taken the actions that we have today, and it's why we've indicated that we will act further if we need to, particularly as we head to this important conference in New York by France and Saudi Arabia, working alongside them.
Carla Denyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UN has warned that 14,000 babies could die in the next 48 hours. Concrete action against Netanyahu's murderous government is long overdue. We know that this government isn't prepared to make a determination on genocide, but they have told us that they are making ongoing assessments to the risk. So will they now finally release that risk assessment for this House and the public to see and prove that this government takes its obligations under international law seriously and they mean what they say about concrete action?
I've just got to remind the Honourable Lady that last year we gave 129 million in humanitarian support to the people of Gaza in the occupied territories. That a lot of that support was for medical aid, which this government begun with vigour as soon as we came in back in September. Behind her question is a serious point. It falls to me to make serious decisions about the sale of arms where there might be or there is a clear risk of a breach in humanitarian law. I took that decision in September. It's a quasi-judicial decision, and it's one I take very soberly and very seriously, and that's continued to be the position since September last year.
Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome today's steps forward, particularly on trade. The fact that we are on the brink of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians is such a collective global failure. It betrays words. And I want to ask, unlike the Shadow Foreign Secretary, will the Foreign Secretary confirm the UK's total opposition to Israeli plans to replace humanitarian NGOs and the UN with mercenaries? Yeah. And in relation to the important statement by the UK, France and Canada threatening further important multilateral action if Israel does not stop, can I ask, what is the red line? We've been here before with the Rafah offensive, when the international community said it would stop Israel and it did not. Gaza is out of time.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. Let me be crystal clear. This government opposes Israel's model for aid. We believe it does not respect humanitarian principles. It cannot deliver aid effectively at speed or at the scale required. It's wrong and it's dangerous to the humanitarian system.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Earlier, the Foreign Secretary used the phrase morally wrong, and I entirely agree with that, and it's equally morally unacceptable, the original Hamas massacre. I'm sure we can all agree on that. But could I take him back to the issue of recognition? I'm one of the members who's previously supported recognising the state of Palestine. Can I suggest that if there were a free vote in this House, there would be an overwhelming support for that, something that would give the government moral authority to take even more robust further action? Could I suggest that they might take that course of action?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. UK bilateral recognition is the single most important action the United Kingdom can take with regard to Palestinian statehood. And that's why it's important for us to get the timing right and to work with partners as we consider these issues very closely. I've talked about the international conference and the implementation of the two-state solution in June. We will, of course, be in attendance at that conference and are talking with our partners about it. They will have heard what he has said.
Hafsal Khan.
Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement and also welcome last night's collective statement. However, repeated strong words without action now ring hollow. Netanyahu's government continues with starvation and killing of innocent Palestinians. Foreign Secretary, suspending trade negotiation and other steps that you announced today will not stop the killing of innocent Palestinians. we are dealing with an extremist right-wing Netanyahu's government. Concrete steps are overdue to uphold our humanitarian commitments. When will you, Foreign Secretary, impose a full arms embargo on Israel and also recognise Palestine?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that we have imposed a ban on arms sales for the eastern Gaza. We did that in September, and I know that his constituents will care a lot about the war in Ukraine and other conflicts across the world, and therefore he will recognise the decision we made, particularly in terms of the F-35 supply chain, and his points around recognition, the whole House will have heard.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Secretary of State's statement today? And can I also start by paying tribute to the humanitarian workers in Gaza who are risking their lives in order to help the Palestinian people today? Madam Deputy Speaker, the very powerful words by our own UN humanitarian chief have already been referenced today, that 14,000 babies need food within the next 48 hours or face starvation. He also said that we have not moved fast enough in the past in the face of other war crimes. Starvation is a weapon of war and is against humanitarian law. The Secretary of State has said that he will not stand by and that unless aid gets in, the government will take consequential action. So how quickly will the government take action to save the lives of those Palestinian babies?
Well, can I say to her that 430 aid workers have been killed. Gaza is the deadliest place on earth for humanitarians. She's absolutely right to recognise those tremendous aid workers. Let me just also reference the medical workers who have lost their lives. Absolutely appalling, the loss of life and the children. And we will continue to do all we can to bring this to an end.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure that we're all absolutely horrified to see the Israeli government creating a mass starvation event in Gaza, that we're seeing the language of the Gaza plan, which talks about the concentration of the Palestinian people in the south of Gaza, and even against its own citizens, arresting 9 Israeli citizens, including civil society leader Alon Lee Green, who was here, I was hosting him here last week in Parliament, and not yet releasing them from arrest. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that this is a deliberate and systemic attempt to destroy the Palestinian people in Gaza? And isn't it time that instead of sanctioning those taking orders, we sanction those giving the orders in the Israeli government?
Well, I say to my honourable friend, and I know that he too has consistently raised these issues, the abandonment and the displacement of Gazans to this small strip is just entirely unacceptable. The idea that we could see this go on right through 2026 is abominable. Tom Fletcher was right to speak out, I think, in recent days, and it's why I think you're seeing the response that you're seeing from international partners. And I hope that Netanyahu heeds the words of friends.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. It is absolutely essential that aid reaches innocent civilians in Gaza, as my right honourable friend for Whittam was equally clear in stating. It is also vital that this war comes to a swift end. But in searching for that path to peace, is it not equally vital that we reflect on certain realities? That it's not Israel that has shut down the ceasefires so far, or is rejecting terms for a new one attempting to be brokered. It is Hamas. It is not Israel holding 58 hostages. It is Hamas. And it is not Israel that is misappropriating aid and selling it on at profit. It is Hamas. And is it not a damning indictment of this government's foreign policy that it is Hamas who are cheerleading this new stance?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that I don't think I've been at this dispatch box on the 6 occasions that statements have been made on this subject when I have not condemned Hamas. I have not condemned what they did on October the 7th. I have not condemned those that are keeping hostages. And let me be clear, I actually believe Hamas are holding hostage the Palestinian people. But just as you can hold that, you can also hold in your heart and in your mind that it is morally reprehensible to continue this blockade, to reduce 400 humanitarian aid points to 4. This is impossible, it's intolerable, and of course the United Kingdom must speak up against it.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is welcome that I believe the Foreign Secretary has listened and heard the strength of feeling on this side that more needs to be done. And I believe that he is more in tune with the families of the hostages who were at the border yesterday protesting what the Israeli government is doing and who should get our solidarity for their work standing up to Prime Minister Netanyahu. But if solidarity matters, then let him hear from these benches as well as he has from other benches the call for a vote on the recognition of Palestine. We held such a vote in this place in 2014, but it is fair to say a minority of those people who supported it are in this House today. With the conference before him, would it not show how we speak as one in calling for an end to what is happening in Gaza, in calling for the Palestinians' right to exist to be recognised, for us to have that vote in this House?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, the British people made a determination when they voted Labour at the last general election, and she knows that in our manifesto we committed to Palestinian recognition in the right circumstances. I've said a lot about the conference, and she will no doubt read a lot about the conference that is coming up on a two-state solution. And I do think that given that we're only days away, that is what should concentrate minds at this time.
Colleagues can see by just looking around the chamber that not everybody is going to get in, and this statement's been already going on for an hour. I'll try and go fast, but I need your help with short questions and shorter answers. Jerry Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could the Foreign Secretary tell us exactly what arms have been supplied to Israel over the past 6 months? What arms are being supplied now to Israel? What RAF criteria is being used for? Is it supporting the Israeli war machine? And can he inform the House categorically that no component part of an F-35 jet made in Britain is supplied to Israel to continue their bombardment of Gaza?
Well, can I say to him with judgment that he asked me a similar question a few weeks ago, and I gave him the answer that we suspended arms sales. That was a sober decision made. They're not being given to Israel for use in Gaza at this time. That is a strict decision under our export licensing regime, save for the carve-out we've made for F-35s, which I know he disagrees with, but that is the position because we're not prepared to disrupt supply chains across the world.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What we've heard from senior UN officials this morning should frankly send shivers down the spine of every member in this chamber. 14,000 Palestinian children could die in the next 48 hours because of Israel's actions. And what we're getting today is stronger words, but with limited action. The time for this Foreign Secretary is long gone. We need further bold and immediate actions. End all arms sales to Israel, impose economic sanctions and ban Israeli settlement goods. What is the government waiting for?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. I've set out the position as it stands today and I would ask him to look carefully at the Prime Minister's statement just this morning, and to look at what he's indicated. Further action could be taken if we do not see this further expansion and this restriction of aid come to an end.
Chambers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We welcome the statement today, and I would like to reiterate my honourable friend's call for the recognition of Palestine and the immediate cessation of all arms sales to Israel. But as important as these are, given that the UN has said 14,000 children and babies may die within the next 48 hours, I would like to reiterate what many members have asked here today, is what is the concrete action that can be taken against an illegal blockade that is preventing medicine and food getting to these people? Does it include, with our allies, for example, airdrops of aid?
Can I say, when the Honourable Gentleman says what is the concrete action, the concrete action is really straightforward, that Netanyahu stops. He halts his course of action. That is the concrete action. We are taking concrete action with our allies to try and bring this to an end, but he knows that in the end, this is in the hands of the Israeli government. And standing here, holding your hands, expressing disgust is not sufficient, I recognise that, but it is in the hands of the Israeli government. They will be held to account if they don't act.
Andy MacDonald.
Deputy Speaker, I very much welcome the tone and content of the Foreign Secretary's statement. I sincerely wish it had come a long time ago, but I've got to tell him on the issue of British arms, they're still getting through in vast quantities to Israel to wreak havoc. The question is, will what he says stop the genocide? For months, the government has claimed it cannot make an assessment whether there is a serious risk of genocide, as it is waiting for a determination by the courts. In the High Court last week, the government told the court it had already conducted an assessment under the Genocide Convention. Which is it? Has a determination been made? And if so, does he want to correct the record?
Can I say to him that arms are not getting to Israel that could be used in Gaza? He will recognise that the United Kingdom is a very small supplier in percentage terms of Israel arms, so I can't account for other countries, and other countries have not made the decision that we have made. And I stand by the assessments that I have made that led to me suspending arms.
Harry Wilson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the House has debated this issue for many, many months now, in fact well over a year, on a regular basis. But we must remind ourselves the reason why we're doing this is that brutal terrorists attacked innocent individuals, innocent citizens, burnt, raped, murdered, tortured and took them hostage, and then continue a conflict against Israel. And I think that in an expression of anger today, the Minister could have been much more balanced. Instead of talking about attacking hospitals, why isn't he condemning the terrorists who use the hospitals for bases, knowing the consequences? Instead of talking about the lack of aid, why is he not recognising the aid that's given and the fact that that aid must not be allowed to be abused by terrorists in Israel? And his message should be...
Order! Our constituents are watching. Foreign Secretary.
On every occasion that I have stood at this dispatch box on this matter, I have raised the reprehensible behaviour on October the 7th, and I have also raised the reprehensible behaviour of Hamas. And I've done that today, and I'll do it again.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The atrocities happening in Gaza and the West Bank, and those even worse which are threatened, amount to the worst attack on Palestinians since the Nakba 77 years ago. Will he give pause to the Netanyahu regime by imposing sanctions on its ministers and banning trade with illegal settlements? And will he give hope to the Palestinian people by recognising the state of Palestine now?
I won't comment on any future sanctions, except he will know that we keep these issues under review, and he will have seen the Prime Minister's statement on these matters a few moments ago, and indeed his statement alongside the Canadian and the French leaders as well. And I know that he's been a long campaigner of the second issue. His views are very well known.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary talks of children orphaned, but if the 14,000 babies that are at risk of death comes true, it would wipe out an entire generation. And we've also seen families burned alive in tents in events that have shocked the world. Enough is enough, Foreign Secretary, and I'd like to join the Right Honourable Member for North West Hampshire in begging you in my knees if I need to take more action. I accept there are more settlers that have been sanctioned, but it has to be time for the Israeli government to face those sanctions. Please can the Honourable Member confirm that this is actively being explored?
Well, I've said what I've said from the dispatch box, and we've taken further action today. Let us see tomorrow what that yields.
Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Between October and December 2024, the government approved over £127 million in export licences to Israel, exceeding the combined total under the Tories for 2020 to 2023. These licences, granted after the government's so-called temporary suspension, include components for lethal F-35 fighter jets. Jets Israel is now flying at 5 times the usual rate, decimating Gaza. Children are starving, families have been wiped out, hospitals destroyed. Yet the government in court claims that there is no evidence Israel targets civilians. The Foreign Secretary is personally responsible and refuses to ban all arms sales to this genocidal state. So, like many across Britain, I have to ask the Foreign Secretary, how do you sleep at night?
Well, the Honourable Lady has raised figures that I don't recognise. She's raised once again the issue of arms sales to Israel. I banned arms sales that could be used in Gaza. I know that the Honourable Lady is keen on clickbait, but I'm not going to be baited from this dispatch box.
Brendan O'Hara.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and allow me to repeat the question from my honourable friend from Bristol Central, which went unanswered. Last week, 65 members from 9 political parties across both houses wrote to the Prime Minister asking that he publish the most recent genocide assessment, the one that convinced him to send his lawyers to the High Court to argue that no genocide has occurred or is occurring. So will the government now publish that assessment so we can all understand how on earth they arrived at the conclusion that the horrors in which we have witnessed day in and day out for months in Gaza is not a genocide?
Well, I answered that question previously. I make sober assessment based on whether there's a clear risk on our export licensing, and I stand by the statements that I've made.
Tahir Ali.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement to this House today. 14,000 babies are going to die within 48 hours. Since this statement started, hundreds will have been dead due to starvation and famine and hunger. Now, the unstated objective of Netanyahu is to displace Palestinians to Jordan and Egypt. One of the concrete actions this Foreign Secretary can take is the immediate recognition of Palestine. And will he do that to stop the prevention of the genocide happening in Palestine?
I think I've now answered that question many times from the dispatch box, but the whole House will have heard what the Honourable Gentleman has said.
Shaukat Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I too cautiously welcome the Foreign Secretary's passion and his statement, albeit a little bit late for 51,000 Palestinians, but nonetheless welcome. On his statement, the Foreign Secretary talks about the suspensions of negotiations on new trade deals. Would a suspension not be more effective on existing trade deals? And if indeed the Foreign Secretary believes the behaviour of the Israeli government is abominable, can I ask why a government minister parted with the Israelis just last week while 370 Gazans were massacred and the world was mourning for them? Does that not undermine trust in the UK's role in this conflict?
Well, I said before to the Honourable Gentleman, I do think it's important that we make a distinction between the Israeli people and Israeli and the current direction of the Israeli government. And I insist that we must be precise in our language on that point.
John Trickett.
The situation in Gaza is utterly intolerable, and the Foreign Secretary convinced the House of his passion, his anger, his indignation. But he will also know that angry rhetoric means nothing if it's not accompanied by forceful actions. Now, many actions, I'm not one of those people saying no actions have been taken by the government. They have. But they haven't had the desired effect. Will he now say he will recognise Israel? He will stop any intelligence sharing with Israel and stop the supply of components to Israel which might be used in their war machine?
Well, again, I've now said much on this matter, particularly the point on recognition. I'm glad that he's recognised what the government has done, because this is the government that increased aid, humanitarian aid, to the Gazans. It's the government that absolutely made clear our position on international humanitarian law. We didn't see that under the last government. We suspended arms sales for use in Gaza. We issued further sanctions on settlers. We've done more sanctions today. We've now suspended a free trade agreement. We've acted collectively with our partners. We led the charge to get that diplomatic statement, those 2 diplomatic statements this weekend. So we are doing all that we can do. And it's now for the Israeli government to act.
Lisa Smart.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary rightly talked about a 2-state solution being the only framework within which we can find a just and lasting peace, and this has long been the case. He also talks about bilateral and multilateral talks for the upcoming conference. If that conference doesn't achieve the hoped-for success, will the government consider unilaterally recognising the state of Palestine?
Our position was set out in the Labour manifesto. We do believe in recognition. We've always believed that recognition should be part of a process, and that is what we're discussing with our French, Saudi Arabian and other partners.
Olivia Blake.
Starvation is a horrific and entirely preventable way to die. 14,000 babies' lives are at risk in the next 48 hours. To put that in perspective, there are 15,000 babies born each and every year in South Yorkshire. So nearly all of them would be wiped out in 2 days if this was the situation here. Can the Secretary of State outline what steps he will take to make sure that this cannot go on, and what more can be done to ensure that there is access to urgently needed aid to prevent this?
Well, the Honourable Lady is right to bring to mind, as other honourable members have across this House, the children, the babies, and the words particularly of Tom Fletcher. And can I reassure her that when I sat in my office, and when the Prime Minister sat in his office with Prime Minister Mustafa of the Palestinian Authority, he also raised the children of the occupied territories. We keep that in mind in our actions, and that has guided us today.
Ben Lake.
Speaker, can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement and for reiterating the government's commitment to take further concrete actions in concert with international allies should the Israeli government fail to cease its military offensive and indeed lift restrictions on humanitarian aid. Given the immediacy of the crisis and warnings that up to 14,000 children at risk of starvation, could the Foreign Secretary please reassure the House that those concrete further steps will be taken at such a time to prevent mass starvation of innocent children?
Well, as I said before, and as the Prime Minister's statement indicates, we will take concrete action, further action, if necessary, but it's my sincere hope that we don't need to take that action, because Prime Minister Netanyahu heeds what those within his country and what the international community is saying.
John McDonnell.
The record of the Netanyahu is that he hasn't heeded the statements here or elsewhere. And I think the general view of the House is that there is a need for urgent action with regard to the desperate situation. Can we come back to the situation and the proposal that's been raised before by a number of us? If the Israelis are not willing to provide the aid, therefore others must. And I agree with the Foreign Secretary, we cannot take unilateral action, but what this government is good at is calling for coalitions of the willing. Can we put on the table now that we call for a coalition of the willing to come together to set a deadline for the Israeli government to deliver the aid or failing that, we will start taking action where we will start delivering aid by air or sea or whatever other method we can use.
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that those 27 partners that we orchestrated, Australia, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Japan, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Portugal, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden and the EU are a coalition of the willing. Our diplomats did that in the last few days. Can I also say to him that yes, airdrops if necessary, working particularly with our Jordanian partners, but he knows that airdrops are not the way to feed the people of Gaza at this point. It is by ending the blockade.
Hamid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also welcome the statement from the Foreign Secretary and the change in tone. However, I'm disappointed to note that the actions announced relate to new trade deals. Last week was the 77th anniversary of the Nakba, Arabic for catastrophe, which commemorates the murder of over 15,000 Palestinians and the illegal forced displacement of more than 750,000 Palestinians from their homes during the establishment of the State of Israel. But the Nakba was not a one-time historical event. It accelerated a process of dispossession, erasure, violence and ethnic cleansing against the Palestinian people, which began under British colonial rule, and the current genocide in Gaza is just the latest of this in this process. So will the Foreign Secretary now take this opportunity on the 77th anniversary of the Nakba and the ongoing starvation of 2 million people today to end all existing military, economic and diplomatic support for Israel as a matter of legal obligation to ensure the UK is no longer complicit in Israel's grave violations of international law?
Well, as I said before, and I'll say again, the Palestinian cause is a just cause, and that is why we are opposed to the further displacement of the Palestinian people, to those in the Israeli government that talk about cleansing and driving people out from their land. And I repeat that we stand by a two-state solution.
Very grateful, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Foreign Secretary, my right honourable friend, and the ministerial team that I've done know have done so much work to get the statement out and other deliverables. But given what we've heard, 48,000 babies in the next 48 hours about to lose their life, hundreds of Palestinians slaughtered in the last overnight. What are the red lines and what is the time frame for action? If babies have only got 48 hours, it needs to be in that order.
Well, the Honourable Lady will have heard what I've said from this dispatch box. She will have seen the efforts of the diplomatic community to come together, and she will know that the United Kingdom is not able to act unilaterally and affect decisions in Israel, but we must take the steps we can take with others, and we are doing that. But she's absolutely right to call to mind those children, and particularly those who may lose their lives in the hours ahead of us.
George.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Although it's long overdue, I warmly welcome the sentiment behind the government's announcement today. Along with the honourable member for Leicester South, we visited Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories last month, and what we saw there was absolutely shocking. Others have described it as apartheid. I think it's actually worse than that. Now, the Foreign Secretary has said that the question of the recognition of the Palestinian state is one which is stuck in a process, but can he not at least today accept that he can recognise the right of Palestinians to statehood and democracy?
What we're discussing with France as a member of the UN Security Council, a permanent member of is how we can actually affect things on the ground. He will recognise that others have recognised a Palestinian state, but we would not be having this debate if it had affected things on the ground. That is the seriousness of what we are discussing with France. And I have to say, as the country's chief diplomat, I stand by the seriousness of actually making a decision that might bring about change on the ground.
Deputy Speaker, the UN has stated that 14,000 babies could starve to death if aid doesn't get in.
The right honourable member described this as intolerable, but it sometimes feels like we still tolerate it. So can the honourable member tell me what the escalation of diplomatic measures against the Israeli government will look like in order that we can stop this atrocity from happening?
Well, can I say that my honourable friend, the Middle East Minister, has left the chamber because he has summoned the Israeli ambassador, and he will be discussing these issues, the issues I've discussed today, but also the mood of the House today, and urging her to watch this debate because we need to see action on the ground.
Adnan Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 14,000 babies is the number. 14,000 babies will die in Gaza within the next 48 hours if aid is not let in. Minister, I ask you, honestly, does your government honestly believe that what's happening in Gaza is not a genocide? And in fact, what is your government doing to stop genocide in Gaza? It seems that you're comfortable in supplying weapons to a state that is also equally comfortable in starving children. I finish by asking, what actions are you going to take? Perhaps expel the Israeli ambassador.
What actions you are going to take? I think we've been in this chamber for long enough to know that's not appropriate language. I should not have to repeat myself, Mr. Foreign Secretary.
We took action when we suspended arms sales to Israel that could be used in Gaza. We did that back in September, and I would urge the honourable gentleman to look at the remarks I made then and to recognise that decision that was made by me and this government.
Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement today and the suspension of trade talks with Israel and further sanctions on Israeli settlers. But in the horror of Gaza, it is clear that the Israeli government is not listening to the exhortations of the international community and that it is very unlikely to listen to this further action today. So I want to press the Foreign Secretary. Foreign Secretary, the UN has placed a timescale on the lifespan of babies in Gaza. It is not too much to ask that the government sets out a timescale for the meaningful further action that the government will take in the event, as seems likely, that the Israeli government does not change course.
Well, I say to my honourable friend, who has been a champion of the Palestinian people and raised this issue of conflict now for many, many months indeed, that I would refer her to the statements of Yair Gallant, the leader of the opposition and former IDF member, who has urged the Netanyahu government to listen because he fears that Israel is losing friends and, as he describes it, will become a pariah state.
Thank you, Mark. Food is the means of life, and it must not be used as a weapon of war. The Foreign Secretary has rightly condemned it as morally wrong, but it's also a breach of international humanitarian law. He's condemned as unjustifiable and disproportionate Minister Smotrich's proposals to cleanse Gaza and displace and destroy all within it. If Mr. Smotrich's plan is carried out in the coming days, does my right honourable friend agree that he will have to use a different word, and that word would be genocide? So will he now sanction Minister Smotrich?
Well, I've heard what the honourable gentleman has said, and he will know that the Prime Minister said that there might well have to be further action. But we urge the government to step back from what they're doing, and of course we continue to condemn the language of extremists in the Israeli government using language like ethnic cleansing.
Just as well.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's condemnation of the illegal actions and the vile words used by the Israeli government. It's heartening and humane to hold Israel accountable for its slaughter of innocent Palestinians, withholding of aid, settler expansion and shameless plans to, and I quote, conquer, cleanse and stay in Gaza. We need action to show that we'll not tolerate this indiscriminate violence, which is effectively ethnic cleansing. Does my right honourable friend agree that our next step should be to recognise the state of Palestine, and could he please outline what actions he will take to stop the impending death
by starvation?
Well, my honourable friend's question mirrors that, I think, across this House, a concern for children, the issue of recognition, and of course the action, not I suspect just by the United Kingdom, but the action that is necessary from the international community.
Joe Powell.
Deputy Speaker, as others have said, 14,000 babies stand at immediate risk of starvation, so this couldn't be a more serious moment, and I do welcome the suspension of trade negotiations and the expansion of sanctions. But as we've done on other sanctions designations, on human rights, on corruption, on Russia, on Georgia, on Belarus and others, we've taken them to the political level. So will the Foreign Secretary consider an expansion of the sanctions regime to those political decision makers advocating for ethnic cleansing and the takeover of Gaza?
Well, my honourable friend is one of the House's experts on how our sanctions regime works, and can I reassure him that all of what he outlines is under consideration.
Dr. Lauren Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The senseless and deliberate suffering in Gaza must end, and humanitarian aid is crucial for that aim and for thousands of children. If the Israeli government continue to politicise humanitarian aid and withhold with their blockages, what sanctions will this government consider and then impose?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady. She says politicise. I'm afraid that this is not just politicisation, it's weaponisation of our aid and the use of food and medical supplies, and it is entirely unacceptable and abominable, and that's why I've said very clearly that the UK government stands against it.
Final question, Harpreet Powell.
Thank you. The impact on children is particularly devastating. 15,000 children killed, 93 now at critical risk of famine. Save the Children report that Palestinian children in Israeli-run prisons are facing worsening abuse, including physical violence and sexual assault. Some have been forced to strip, held in extreme temperatures and denied contact with their families. These are not the actions of a democratic state. So can I urge the Foreign Secretary to act on behalf of those children, and can I ask what steps he's taking to press for the immediate release of those children?
Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for raising this issue, because when considering those assessments under international humanitarian law, I particularly paid regard to the way that detainees are treated and the clear risk that there are some breaches of international humanitarian law in this area. So she's right to call to mind those children who may be detained and the human dignity that all children, wherever they are in the world, deserve. Madam Deputy Speaker, that I've not been able to answer all questions in the hour and a half that I've been on my feet, but I hope that our friends in Israel have seen the strength of feeling across the House today.
That concludes the statement. Point of order, Mark Richard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, I think today we've had the heaviest hint from any British government minister, from the Foreign Secretary, that ahead of the Palestinian state discussions led by Saudi and France at the UN in June, that the British government is on its way to recognising a Palestinian state, which I would welcome. But ahead of that, can I seek your guidance on how members across this House, who feel very, very strongly about this issue, will have an opportunity to vote ahead of that meeting in order that the government has full authority from this Parliament on the issue of recognising a Palestinian state?
I think the honourable member knows that point of order is not a matter for the chair, but actually an issue for the government, and no doubt the Foreign Secretary and the front bench have heard and will respond in due course. Point of order, Keith Malthouse.
I'm grateful, Madam Chair. In furtherance to the point of order by my honourable friend for the Rekin, I wonder if you could remind the House what the process is for us obtaining an emergency debate under Standing Order 24, on the basis that this situation is so dire and so acute that a number of us may wish to apply for such a debate.
I think the honourable member, he and I both came into Parliament together. He knows the process for SO 24. He does not need me to remind him of the process. He will get much advice much advice from the Speaker's office, and no doubt the strength of feeling has been heard repeatedly and by the 2 points of order by the Foreign Secretary and the Treasury on the front bench. Point of order, Gregory Campbell.
Separate point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker. You'll be aware that I and other colleagues have been raising the issue of UK residents in Northern Ireland, many of whom have lived here for decades as taxpayers and voters, but who were born a few miles across the border in the Irish Republic. They've not been able to avail of a UK passport the same way as others who live in Northern Ireland can obtain an Irish passport. This was brought to a head by my honourable friend, the member for East Belfast, exactly 1 year ago this week, when his bill became law and received royal assent. Despite my repeated parliamentary questions to the Home Secretary, I have not been able even to get a date by which the first UK passports will be issued to people in Northern Ireland. Has the Home Secretary or a Home Office Minister indicated to the Speaker's office their intention to make a statement to the House to finally announce when this injustice will end?
I am grateful to the honourable member for giving notice of this point of order. I have had no indication from ministers that they intend to come to the House to make a statement on this matter, but I note that it is Home Office questions on Monday and he still has time to table an oral question to the Home Secretary. Point of order, Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On a separate point of order, the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy, which I chair, is responsible for examining cross-cutting issues of national security. You'd appreciate that the UK faces a great range of external threats, internal challenges around resilience and the choices it makes about its relationships with allies and partners. Now, the JCNSS is following the government's efforts to address these matters very closely, and the work of the National Security Advisor is central to that success. Now, since the role's creation in 2010, every NSA has appeared before this committee for a public accountability session, until now, that is. Of course, some more sensitive conversations need to be held behind closed doors, but these public sessions are an essential way in which the Prime Minister's primary advisor on issues of national security are held to account by Parliament. So, despite its commitment to transparency and numerous exchanges, the government remains steadfast that the NSA will not be accountable to Parliament. I'm concerned that the government is using a quirk of his appointment as a special advisor rather than a permanent official to erode democratic norms that future, less benevolent governments could later exploit. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, can you just advise me on how my committee can get the government to prove it is committed to increasing transparency, to recognise the dangerous precedent it is setting, and allow the NSA to appear before us?
I am grateful to the honourable member for giving notice of his point of order. The attendance of witnesses before select committees is not a matter for the Chair. However, it is surprising that the current National Security Advisor has declined to appear before the Joint Committee when all his predecessors have been willing to do so. The Government's own guidance on the matter states that Parliament has powers to call any individual to give evidence, and that when a select committee indicates that it wishes to take evidence from any particular named official, including special advisers, the presumption is that ministers will seek to agree such a request. I am sure that the clerks will be able to advise the honourable member and his committee on how best to pursue the matter further. No more points of order. And we go on to the presentation of bills. Presentation of Bill, Lisa Smart.
Child Abduction and Custody Act 1985 Amendment Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 11th of July.
Friday the 11th of July. Allow the front benches now to shuffle over. Chamber should do so very discreetly. We now come on to the 10-minute rule motion, reasonable adjustments, duty on employees to respond, and I call Deirdre Castigan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about a deadline by which employers must respond to requests for reasonable adjustments from disabled workers and for connected purposes. I draw the House's attention to my register of interests and my proud membership of Unison. I thank the Minister for Social Security and Disability, my right honourable friend, the member for East Ham, for being present today. Madam Deputy Speaker, before I was elected, I was the National Officer for Disability Equality at the country's biggest trade union, Unison. I was also a shop steward for many years, and I represented countless workers who were having problems at work. And it was disabled workers, more than any, that were facing those problems. In fact, disabled workers made up about 2/3 of my cases as a union rep. Now, by law, employers have to make changes to help disabled people stay in their jobs. These are called reasonable adjustments. They can include changes like a special keyboard to reduce arthritis pain, IT software to help workers with dyslexia, or starting work at 10 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock after tablets have kicked in. Unison's research found that almost 3/4 of disabled workers are turned down for reasonable adjustments like this. And even where their employer said yes, about 1/4 of disabled workers waited a year or more to have the changes put in place. But the most common story I heard from disabled workers was that they were just ignored by their employer. They never got a reply at all. For many, this meant they had to do their job whilst in pain, or they were set up to fail because they didn't have the right equipment. Their manager would start to criticise their performance because it's hard to hit your targets when you're in constant pain. They would end up having to take time off sick. Before they knew it, they would be pushed out the door. Others just resigned because the pain or the stress was too much. And all because their employer refused to make those small changes that would have kept them in work. Employers can get away with this because there's no legal deadline for them to reply to disabled workers. This contrasts with other employment rights, like flexible working requests, where the employer has to reply within 8 weeks. But there's no such rule for reasonable adjustments. This is a serious gap and is leading to disabled people being pushed out of good jobs and onto benefits. My bill would set a clear deadline for employers to reply to disabled workers making a request for reasonable adjustments. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are over 5 million disabled people already in work, but this represents less than 52% of disabled people, compared to 80% of non-disabled people in work. This 29-point difference between the percentage of disabled people employment versus non-disabled people is called the disability employment gap, and governments have tried and failed to crack it for years. But I believe this Labour government finally offers disabled people a chance at equality. We've already passed the Employment Rights Bill, which gives everyone the right to flexible working, but this will especially help disabled people who could benefit from more breaks or part-time working to manage pain or fatigue. But on top of this, our Pathways to Work plan will invest £1.8 billion into employment support for disabled people. The recent Learning and Work Institute report found that 2 in 10 disabled people on benefits want to work, but at least half of them aren't getting any help to find a job. When I visited West Ealing Job Centre in my constituency last August and asked staff who a disabled person could speak to about finding a job that met their needs, they had no answer. There was no help available. Imagine what it must be like to want to work, but being stuck in a system that won't let you, that forces you to live on benefits when you don't want to and you don't have to. So this government is investing in new trailblazer schemes to support disabled people who want to work. As part of this, West London Alliance, which covers Ealing Southall, did a very simple thing. They sent an email to local disabled people on long-term sickness benefits due to musculoskeletal conditions and asked them if they wanted help finding a job. Over 200 people replied straight away to say yes, They wanted help. That's 200 disabled people who had been sat on benefits with no help at all under the previous government. Labour's plan will give disabled people who want to work the help they need. And our Employment's Right Bill and our increase in the national living wage will ensure that those jobs are good quality, decently paid jobs as well. This Labour government's plan to get Britain working also offers a once-in-a-generation opportunity to radically transform the workplace so that it finally works for disabled people. Sir Charlie Mayfield, the former John Lewis boss, has been asked by government to come up with ideas to make work more accessible and to ensure employers take more responsibility for supporting disabled workers to stay in their jobs. My bill would give a right to a response to reasonable adjustment requests to the 5 million disabled people already in work and would help open up jobs to hundreds and thousands of disabled people who want to work. But I look forward to seeing what other ideas the report identifies. I hope the Mayfield Review will look at some of the demands of the Disability Employment Charter, which I was a founding member of when I worked for Unison. This includes ideas like a stronger right to paid disability leave for assessment, rehabilitation and training. Taken together, the Learning and Work Institute report found that the investment this Labour government is making could lead to up to 165,000 disabled people moving from benefits into decent jobs. What an achievement that would be. Madam Deputy Speaker, too many disabled people face losing jobs they love because employers simply don't give them the help they need to thrive at work. This government's record £1.8 billion investment in employment support will help disabled people who want to work. But we also need to make sure those jobs are long-lasting, and that's why employers must be held to a clear deadline to agree the small changes disabled workers need to get on at work. The government's Get Britain Working Plan is an opportunity to transform the workplace so it fits around the needs of disabled workers. My new bill will support this aim by giving more disabled people the chance to enjoy good quality jobs that are the best route out of poverty and to unleash their many, many talents. I hope the government will consider taking it forward.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many in that opinion say aye? Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Katrina Murray, Mark Ferguson, Annalise Midgley, Lawrence Turner, Sarah Russell, Chris Bloor, Lee Barron, Tom Rutland, Uma Kumaran, Natasha Irons, Dr Marie Tidball and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Deirdre Castigan. Beautifully done.
Reasonable adjustments, duty on employers to respond.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 13th of June.
Friday the 13th of June. The front benches need to shuffle over. They have a moment now. Colleagues could be seated. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Victims and Courts Bill, second reading.
Now. Minister to move, second reading, and I call Shabana Mahmood. Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the bill be read a second time. Madam Deputy Speaker, when this government took office just 10 months ago, we inherited a justice system in crisis. Our prisons were on the point of collapse, the backlog in our courts was at record levels and rising fast, and victims were all too often paying the price. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government is beginning the long and hard work of rebuilding our justice system so it serves victims once more. In my eyes, that means meeting
Democrats dislike this bill so much because it's so darn Republican. Embraces three fundamental Republican principles: cut taxes, secures the border, requires work. We're the party that believes you should let mom and dads keep more of their money to chase down their goals and dreams. We're the party that believes you should actually have a secure border. This bill does it, as Chairman Green just pointed out. And we're the party that believes able-bodied adults, if they're going to get your money, should have to work. It's good for taxpayers, it's good for the economy, most importantly, it's good for that individual. This bill embraces three fundamental principles of our party. That's why I think it's really important that Republicans lean in and go tell the American people how important this legislation is, how it keeps faith with what we told the voters we were going to do last November, why they elected us, and it's right on point. So I'm confident we're going to get there this week, get the votes that we need to get this thing passed, because it does the things we said we were going to do. And with that, I yield to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Chairman Smith.
Thank you, Jim. President Trump promised and delivered, and now the House will too. The One Big Beautiful Bill stops the largest tax increase in history and focuses benefits on workers, families, farmers, and small businesses. It unleashes Made in America manufacturing and delivers on President Trump's promise to all American workers. This is an economic growth agenda combined with historic spending reforms that protects those in need and puts America on a path to a better future. $140 billion in your tax dollars shouldn't go to illegal immigrants who have broken the law. Instead, Republicans are putting that money towards no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. Fortunately, 77 million Americans have already weighed in. We're going to deliver on the president's promises, and we're going to help working and middle-class Americans. This is very personal for me. I grew up in a single-wide trailer in a town of less than 5,000 people. The average income in my hometown is just over $24,000. My priority is the working class. That is the priority of President Trump, and that is the priority of the Republican Party. And this bill delivers for them. My neighbors back home and hard-working families and communities, just like in Salem, Missouri, and all across the United States. According to the Council of Economic Advisors, the no tax on tips policy alone will lead to an additional $1,700 in the pockets of each of the 4 million different tipped employees working in communities throughout this nation. Family take-home pay will increase up to $13,300 under the One Big Beautiful Bill. And the same study showed that tax relief for seniors, meanwhile, would increase the average take-home pay for qualifying seniors by approximately $450 per year. I'm proud to say we're taking the president's promise and going even farther by delivering even greater benefits for them. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Failure is not an option. We have to deliver for the American people. Pleased to turn over to Whip Emmer.
Thanks, Jason. This week, House Republicans face a historic moment that has the potential to revive the American dream
and solidify the comeback that has already begun under President Donald J. Trump. From our nation's farmers to police officers working 60 hours a week, from America's top manufacturers to small businesses on Main Street, our one big, beautiful bill holds promise for every American. In fact, nearly 1,000 organizations have already expressed support for the policies within the bill. The Job Creators Network described our reconciliation bill as, quote, exactly what the country needs to jumpstart the economy and guarantee the safety and prosperity of Americans for decades to come, end quote. The National Association of Manufacturers said of this landmark legislation, quote, we need certainty now, and this is the moment to deliver one big, beautiful bill that lets us compete and win, end quote. Their warning could not be more true. The time to get this done is now. Not only does this legislation make the 2017 Trump tax cuts permanent and implement no tax on tips and overtime pay, it also unleashes American energy, cuts waste, fraud, and abuse, and allows President Trump to continue his successful deportation and border security operations. And that's only naming a handful of things this bill accomplishes. Our reconciliation bill delivers on President Trump's America First agenda, and it does so while saving the American people over $1.6 trillion. The one big, beautiful bill is truly a once-in-a-generation chance to get America back on track. House Republicans must seize this opportunity, and quickly. As my good friend Jason Smith just said, failure is not an option. With that, I turn it over to our leader, Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Whip. Well, this morning, President Trump had a strong and clear message to a packed House Republican conference. And that is after months of long, intense discussions over really important differences and issues. This one big, beautiful bill has come through the committee process, and it's time to end the negotiations, unify behind this bill, and get it passed on to the Senate. And what President Trump really talked about was the things that we all talked about during the campaign, how important it was to prevent a tax increase on working class families. Low and middle income families would see a large, painful tax increase if this bill were not to happen. And look, we all know every Democrat's going to vote no. They've bragged about it. They are fighting tooth and nail to stop us from preventing a tax increase. Democrats also have made it clear they want open borders, and they sure don't want the provisions of this bill, as Chairman Green and Chairman Jordan talked about, that will give our Border Patrol agents the tools they've been asking for years to finally have the technology to be able to compete with the drug cartels and have better tools than the cartels of Mexico have to secure our border, to complete construction of the wall, to deport criminals who came to America to harm our citizens. And President Trump is finally following through on that promise to secure our border, but he needs more tools to do it. Something we also ran on was producing more energy in America. And this bill reverses the Biden-era policies that shut off American energy, making our country more dependent on hostile nations, giving Putin billions of dollars a month more to fund his war in Ukraine by shutting American energy off. This bill opens it back up again. It generates more money. It generates opportunity for families. It generates higher wages for hardworking taxpayers. It will generate real economic growth to lower inflation, to lower costs at the grocery store, to lower interest rates, all the things that 77 million voters gave us a mandate to go deliver on. I know we've got a few final issues to resolve, but as President Trump said today, it's time to stop the talking, and we need action. We need to deliver for those families who have been waiting way too long for the results that are in this one big, beautiful bill. A lot of great policies to deliver for those families is just waiting. We're going to deliver this week. We're going to bring the bill. Failure absolutely is not an option. We've got to get this done. And the man leading that charge here in the House, who President Trump had some great words about, is our Speaker, Mike Johnson.
Thank you, Leader. Thanks to all these great leaders standing behind me. I tell you what, we're in a very good mood this morning. We had an epic time on the Hill. I don't think there's ever been a time when I've been more proud to be a Republican, to be an American. We're on the verge of making history here, and everybody feels it. In that room today with President Trump, it was filled with standing ovations and high energy and high excitement because everybody senses what's happening here. It was a great esprit de corps, and we're blessed to serve under and with a president who understands the necessity of these relationships and is willing to roll his sleeves up and come stand in the trenches to be a part of this excitement of what's happening. From the outset of the budget reconciliation process, we have sought to enact President Trump's full agenda, not just parts of it. And that's why we call it the one big beautiful bill, because really everything is sandwiched into this. The American people were sick of wasteful spending and high inflation and open borders and weakness on the world stage. And you know what we're working towards right now? The opposite of all those things. President Trump has used his executive authority in historic ways to stop much of the bleeding. But Congress has a role and a responsibility to step in at this stage to stitch up and mend those wounds for good. And that's what this legislation is about. We cannot leave the American people waiting or wanting. The one big beautiful bill enshrines into law and funds President Trump's promises. There's a lot of them because we had to make them, because after the last 4 years, everything was an absolute disaster. So he's promised to cut wasteful spending and save taxpayers' money. Check. That's what we're doing. Make permanent historic tax cuts and prevent the largest tax hike in U.S. history. Check. That's what we're doing. Invest in our national defense and homeland security in a fiscally responsible manner. That too. Reestablish American energy dominance. And basically restore common sense to the government. That's what the American people elected him to do. This bill does all that and so much more. And as a reminder, we're right on schedule. Our House Budget Resolution gave instructions to 11 separate committees in the House to write their portions of the Budget Reconciliation Bill, and they did it right on target. Every instructed committee exceeded those targets, in fact, that they were given through our resolution. That means the committees that were told to spend have spent less, and the committees that were told to save actually found more savings than they were targeting. And the bill delivered more than $1.5 trillion in savings mandated by the budget resolution. That is historic. There's never been anything like it before, and we're proud to deliver it. This is a whole of Congress response to a whole of government problem, and the results of all this work for over a year has now come to fruition. Every House Republican has engaged in the process. The White House has been involved, as you saw most recently within the last hour. The Senate has been involved. Constituent groups from around the country made their voices heard, and that's why, as the whip said, nearly 1,000 organizations have issued enthusiastic public endorsements about this legislation. I don't think there's ever been anything like that. No legislation has ever garnered that much support. It's really something, and we never promised it'd be easy. We never thought this was going to be an effortless process, because when you're doing this much in a bill this large and complicated and comprehensive, there's a lot of opinions in the room. We respect that in the Republican Party. We're people of deep principle and settled philosophy, and you're going to get differences of opinion when you work through these things. That's part of it. We welcome it. Nothing in Congress is ever easy, especially when you have small margins. But we are going to land this plane and deliver this, and we're proud what we've accomplished together. Every member of the conference can be proud of this legislation in the end. It's truly a nation-shaping piece of legislation. You heard some of the highlights here. Let me just give you a couple of things that haven't been mentioned yet or can't be mentioned enough. Some of the big conservative wins in the bill that are common sense wins from the American people. Putting Americans first. I love what Chairman Jordan said. This is really simple. We're delivering. We're doing what we said we were going to do. When you talk about putting Americans first, we're making the largest investment in border security in over a generation, providing nearly $150 billion to secure our border and deport illegal aliens. We are cracking down on illegal aliens receiving Medicaid, Medicare, SNAP, and tax benefits that are intended for the citizens of this country. We're shifting the cost of adjudication in the immigration system from the American taxpayer to the aliens themselves. And we're imposing a fee on remittance payments to foreign countries by illegal aliens. Second category, providing historic tax relief. We're going to eliminate taxes on tips and overtime and provide tax relief for seniors on Social Security. We're going to eliminate taxes on auto loan interest if that car is made in the U.S., lowering the cost of borrowing for America's farmers and providing tax relief for job creators. Another category, bringing back common sense. I mean, that's the continuing theme here that we all talk about. We're repealing and rolling back over $500 billion in funding for the radical Green New Deal policies from Biden's so-called Inflation Reduction Act. We call it the Inflation Act. We're ending Biden's war on American energy. We're banning Medicaid dollars from going to transgender surgeries for minors. We're canceling Biden's student loan repayment program. We're increasing university endowment tax for these big woke institutions. We're revoking tax exempt status for nonprofits that materially support terrorism. We're doubling the jail time for leaks of confidential taxpayer information. We're eliminating big businesses' ability to engage in woke PR campaigns to facilitate refundability for green energy projects. We're incentivizing federal workforce to be at-will employees, and we're repealing Biden's disastrous EV mandate. The stakes couldn't be any higher. We could go on and on. It's over 1,000 pages. I could list all the wins, but we only have so much time. Despite the overwhelming popularity of so many of these provisions in this bill, the guys on the other side of the congressional Democrats have refused to engage with us in this process at all. They're not going to vote for anything that I just listed for you. And make no mistake about it. This week they're going to vote for. They're going to vote for the largest increase in taxes in American history. They're going to vote against border security, against American energy dominance, and against broadly popular policies such as work requirements to shore up Medicaid. President Trump's one big beautiful bill is going to require one big beautiful vote. And this is our shot. Best chance. This is our best chance that we'll ever have in our lifetimes, in any of us, in any of our lifetimes, to deliver on the mandate handed down by so many Americans. 77 million Americans voted for President Trump, more than that. And in fact, it's exactly what Republicans were sent to Washington to accomplish, as Chairman Jordan said. By passing this legislation, wages will increase as much as $11,600. Take-home pay for the typical American family with 2 kids will increase by $13,300 a year. As many as 4.2 million full-time equivalent jobs will be created because of this legislation. But if we fail, here's the alternative. Here's what the Democrats are going to vote for. Every American citizen seeing a 22% tax hike. 26 million businesses would see a tax increase of 43%. We'd lose nearly 6 million jobs in the economy and about $1 trillion in GDP by some estimates. The Border Patrol and ICE would lack the resources to detain and deport criminal illegal aliens, and 1.4 million illegals would continue to receive taxpayer funding of health care. Look, we could go on and on this morning about finishing the border wall and accomplishing all these things that we've talked about. But I'm just end it here and tell you that failure is simply not an option. We have to get this done. I told President Trump on the campaign trail that I believed he could be the most consequential president of the modern era and arguably maybe one of the most in all of U.S. history, maybe top 2 or 3. I think this is the way we deliver that. And by extension, that means that this Congress can be one of the most consequential in history. We do not take that lightly. And despite the challenges and the nonstop media criticism and the historically small House majority, we are right on track to deliver. And that's what you'll see this House do this week. Now, we're not going to take a lot of questions this morning because we've already done a ton of media with you in the halls. The President gave you a lot. We gave you a lot. What we're leaving to do right now is gather up the small subgroups in the House Republican Conference and tie up the remaining loose ends. I'm very confident that we'll be able to do that. There's a great esprit de corps in the room this morning because everybody knows what's at stake. All the things we've talked about here this morning, we are going to get this done. So this is a rare thing. I'm going to say hold the questions and let me go get back to work so we can finish this thing up. Okay? Thanks for being here this morning. Thank you.
Mr. Leadership, there's a requirement to take questions in this